Everyone, just wanted to jump on here tonight because I was working on a pretty impactful avoidant breakup with a client just a little while ago, and I felt called to talk about just the general themes of how to heal from an avoidant breakup because it's messy. It's convoluted, it's complex, and a lot of people aren't doing it right. And I think that it's important to talk about the realities of it, the phases of it as I see it. And I'm keen to unpack this with everyone. So before we get into this today, I just want to say, if any of you are interested in getting your questions answered, feel free to throw them in the question mark box below because I'm keen to go through those when I get around to it. Today I'm going to be talking about quite a few things. I'm going to be talking about just my own little creation of stages of healing post-avoidant breakup. And I want to start using these more often to tell people sort of like where they're at in their journey because it does, I think, help give people a bit of a roadmap to recovery and also the realities of the situation as well too, because I think there's a lot of idiots out there who are like, oh, just get over them. You know, you don't need to grieve someone who's like this. You dodged a bullet. I'm afraid no one's dodged any bullets, and in fact a lot of us have been riddled by bullets and we're going to be just, bleeding for quite some time. So anyways, let's get straight into it. Alright, I'm actually going to first answer this question. My avoidant broke up with me 5 months ago and he didn't reach out. Should I unfollow him? I can't give you any advice, but if it was me, I'd say, it really depends on where you're at and also what's good for your emotional well-being right now. I personally have found that some people need to still maintain contact with their exes on Instagram or socials just for a little while. Other times, not so much a good idea. Anyways, let's dive straight in. Okay, so just as a reminder, some of these stages that I'm going to be talking about with regards to recovery they're not necessarily, formalized by any sort of academic references. These are just things that I've come up with as someone who's been working on this now for nearly 5 years, and I've gone through my own experiences with this, and I also want to just be able to talk about it quite freely. All right, let's talk about the stage that no one wants to admit. Stage 0, which I aptly name denial. If you are dating someone with a severe avoidant attachment style, you've made a choice. And this is when you either knowingly are aware that this is the person you are with, or you try and bury your head in the sand and want to just pretend that their emotional deficits are not affecting you, even though you're riddled with high stress, high blood pressure, health problems, and you're navigating a lot of issues. This is when, say for example, we are seeing people who are engaging in a number of self-destructive behaviors that are just not good for them. They are 1, still engaging with this partner in a variety of different relationship styles. They may be married to this avoidant partner and their partner is chronically cheating on them over and over and over again, and they feel powerless, trapped, helpless, like they won't find anyone better to be with, and so they stick it out even though it's destroying them on the inside. That's one example. And by the way, as I say this, I am not shaming anyone who does this. It happens. So I understand that a lot of people feel like they can't do anything about it. I'm not here to tell them what's best for them in their individual circumstances, but this is not ideal in the long run for your health and well-being. So that's 1. 2, this is where we might see someone who is having an ongoing affair with an avoidant partner who's severe in their attachment injury, and they believe they will finally leave their current spouse and choose them. This will never happen. And even if it does, the avoidant partner who's now lost their partner, like let's just say, for example, you've got, in a heteronormative example, an avoidant woman is dating a man and she's got a guy who's also having an affair. Sorry, she's having an affair with another guy. Guy B is like, okay, well, she's going to eventually leave him and then be with me because she's complained about how terrible he is. One of two things are going to happen. She will stick it out with guy A and string guy B along, not for malicious reasons, but for emotional, she wants the emotional connection without the commitment and intimacy. Or if guy A leaves the picture by divorce or whatever may happen, Now that he's gone and that buffer between her and guy B has been removed, her fears of intimacy and commitment will come up full force and she will push guy B away. So unfortunately, no one wins in that situation. It's pretty tragic for everyone. Another variation of this would be called, I wouldn't even call it the situationship, I'd call it the textuationship. You are continuing to see someone, and to use the words of Dr. Sarah Hensley, it's barely even a situationship. You are literally just enamored with someone who is giving you the bare minimum. This is particularly common and dangerous for those of you who are in the LGBTQI plus community, where you're navigating a situationship, I wouldn't even call that, with someone who is mega avoidant and in the closet, and you're trying to convince yourself that you can somehow get them to transform into someone who wants to be with you. This is probably one of the most dangerous examples of this, because even though I don't doubt you sense there's something inside of them that likely is part of the LGBTQA plus experience, for them to admit and accept that is going to be step one, and it is probably the hardest step for them to admit, so they're probably not going to do that anytime soon. So just letting you know, that is a situation you want to be very fucking careful of, because that can stab people in the heart time and time again. But again, I am not here to tell people what to do in these circumstances. I am just saying how the realities are. Please take this information and use it as you will. Then we have 4, the love addict circles, the twin flame followers who are waiting around patiently, praying to whoever they believe in that their savior will bring around their avoidant partner and that they will magically be able to go off into the sunset and live happily ever after again. I sort of cluster these individuals with the Get Your Ex Back group people, in the sense that they're still waiting on a miracle, because they're thinking, when this person returns, they're finally going to choose me. They'll finally want to be with me. And it's, as for a lot of you will know, it's going to be more of the same. And you may be waiting on the return of Jesus at this rate. So it's a very dangerous place to be in, because you're actually giving up so much of your vitality and life energy to wait for someone who's not choosing to connect with you. So that's one stage of that. All right. So stage 0, as I call it, like I said, is characterized by denial. It's where you cannot see that this experience is addictive, abusive, dangerous to your well-being, and overall someone who is not necessarily good for your health in the long run. But again, it is a choice. If you are still looking to try and make this work out with your avoidant partner, to make sure that you don't leave any stone unturned, I hear you. I've been there. I've done that. And I have to say, it's not something I recommend for everyone, but you're allowed to choose what you want to choose. Now let's talk about stage 1 of healing, grief work. This is where I think a lot of you are at. This is where a lot of you have been in a position where you are in a state of absolute grief and shock like none other. This is where you are probably in a position where you've been put into a form of no contact by your avoidant partner, or you've got some semi-contact. I'd say, just to take a step back to stage 0 for one sec, people who are in the boomerang cycle with another avoidant are still in stage 0, because they're still maintaining the addiction. Stage 1 is when there is now separation and there is the intention to stay that way. You know, this is where you have to go through the brutal withdrawal process. This is where it's characterized by learning about attachment styles and likely realizing my partner probably has got an avoidant attachment style, which explains this behavior to me. This is also characterized by having a multitude of confusing feelings, which is where I feel like, I'm grieving someone who was my best friend. 85% of them was incredible. On one hand, they gave me so much support, acts of service. They made me feel like they cared for me in ways that I've never been cared about before. Normally, I'm the one who's very outgoing and overgiving, and I would have done anything to make it work with this person. And this is where you might also feel like it's just so maddening to believe that 10, 15, 5% of this person, literally their anxiety was the thing that got in the way of this, because you have, and this is the hard thing to admit, no control or no way of fixing an otherwise phenomenal relationship with this person. You feel powerless. You feel like your ego has been smashed into a million pieces. You feel humiliated. You feel embarrassed. You feel as though you're in just such a state of grief. Everyone around you is like to you, just get over it. You just dodged a bullet. You're going to have a new space opened up for you for the new person. Well, I am here to say defensively for those of you who are going through it, fuck that shit. Because a lot of you are probably feeling like, that was my person, still is my person, they're still alive. Or maybe on one hand it'd be better if they died. Like, a lot of you will probably be like, that is still my person. They were still really good for me. No, they weren't all that bad to me throughout the entire course of this. No, in fact, they were really good at being able to show up for me in a lot of ways. In fact, they were the best person I had yet. So excuse me if I don't necessarily feel like throwing them on the bonfire and just immolating them for the sake of just putting them on, just basically, saying they're not okay. So anyways, the point simply is, this is a period where a lot of people are still grieving the fuck out of the good stuff that they had with their avoidant partner, and that is necessary. And we'll talk more about that in a minute, because this is part of the healing journey as well. Then, I'm sure a lot of you know this too, the anger and the frustration and the disappointment, which is separate to what you've experienced as well too. The anger of like, how dare they do what they did to me? Now, this is where some people tend to get it twisted and they get stuck here as well too. There is a lot of people who tend to take anger to the next level of just villainizing and being like, they're avoidant, they never cared about me, they just used me like a spare piece of tissue paper, they never really gave a shit about me at all. Wrong. And if you listen to yourself with the previous account of that, you would know they cared about you in several instances of your life, but I'm not here to talk about that aspect just yet. This is the period where you may find yourself being furious, beyond angry at how terrible they've been and how you were someone who were just so good at showing up for them, and you were just there in every sense of the way, trying to make them feel loved. How the fuck can they not make you feel... how can they not just get it through their head that you were trying to make it work for them? And this is also, a stage where we see a lot of people who are who are going through tremendous psychological resistance to a variety of things. I can see someone here has said, hardest part is not being able to hate them, to be honest. Yeah, one of those resistances being that you still empathize with this person. They've gone through so much pain, they're going through so many difficulties, their mental health, their trauma. Oh my God, I feel so sorry for them. Yeah, that over tendency of us to then put ourselves in their shoes, even though we don't actually know how they're responding to their trauma, can cause us to feel a lot of projected empathy for them. We feel like, oh my God, I'm so sorry for them. We also pedestal them, particularly if these are people who are in seemingly good positions at work, engineers, doctors, lawyers. We may think they're smart, they're self-aware, they must know what they're talking about if they think that they don't know what's best for us in our relationship. And we lose our sense of agency and remember the fact that it's like, hang on a minute, this was my relationship too. The inner critic loves to go ballistic and be like, if you were less needy, if you were not so all over the shop, this person would want to be with you. If you just didn't tell them about their attachment styles, maybe they'd still want to be with you. In fact, better yet, maybe if you knew about attachment theory, you could have done something to fix this. And what the inner critic is trying to do is protect you from feelings of shame and embarrassment because seemingly you didn't know any better. And the inner critic is very misguided. We'll talk about some of these disparate parts in a hot second. This is a phase where you may find yourself just waking up, at the middle of the night, having panic attacks, having nightmares, grieving them again and again and again and again and again, and just being so upset at the fact that this person is out of your life and you miss them terribly. And you may be beating yourself up being like, I am so crazy right now. How is it that I can be missing this person who's bad for me and at the same time, still not able to reconcile how bad they are for me? It's an emotional roller coaster. A lot of you have heard me say that. It's not particularly fun, but this is how it is. It's full-on grief work on steroids. And so you might be like, okay, well, what does one do with this? Like, where do we go from here? Well, when I'm with my clients, there's a lot of different parts to this. And this is where you need to be... there's another part to this too, which I forgot to mention too, which I'll get into in a minute. But this is basically where you need to understand, you've got to be very careful of where you're at emotionally and work to that. Another thing I wanted to throw into this part of grief work is, and I always chuckle about this now because it makes so much sense now that I've connected the dots. A lot of you will often think, I feel like I've turned avoidant now. No, actually you haven't. What you're experiencing is the freeze response. What a lot of you are experiencing is going numb, feeling hopeless, feeling disconnected, experiencing what's called anhedonia, where you've lost pleasure in a lot of things in your life that you used to enjoy. And you might feel like you understand what it's like to be avoidant because they thrive. Well, I shouldn't say they thrive, but they dwell in the freeze response, especially the dismissives. Dismissive leaning fearfuls, yes. Anxious leaning fearfuls, not so much. But a lot of the dismissive leaning fearfuls and the dismissive avoidance absolutely are very much familiar with the freeze response and like the extreme side of that. So for a lot of you may be thinking, I've now turned avoidant. No, it's just a phase. But but you've got to be very careful with this because this is a phase where a lot of you will start to feel quite suicidal. This is a phase where you will often feel very disconnected from yourself emotionally, and you're probably going to start to use maybe pharmacological drugs to try and self-medicate to get you back down again to more rest and digest. If that works, wonderful. But this is just another part of this experience. Okay, so what do we do here? Like, how do we work through this? So this is where, like I was saying, you need to work with where you're at in this particular emotional journey. You honor the bad days when you feel angry. You honor the days that you feel sad and you're missing this person. One thing I want to say is there can be a lot of imposed, self-imposed, and external imposed, pressure on you to get over this. Please, for the love of God, get rid of the timeline you have on yourself to heal. I know a lot of you want to be like, I'm over this by tomorrow. You won't be. You'll be over it in 2 years most of the time. Honestly, I'd say anywhere between 6 months to 2 years is the general baseline I see for a lot of people. Any longer than that, and I know there's something not quite right and there's something that's getting in the way of things. And I'd say we can pretty much figure out what's going on at that stage. It's important to understand that this is a time where, even though you'll be a little bit of an obsessive detective trying to figure out what was going on, that's fine, for it's a phase. It's really important to honor the stages. If you're intellectualizing, trying to figure out what happened, go for it. It's a phase. If you need to be angry, go for it. If you need to be sad and just grieve the heck out of this person because you still miss the potential of what was going to be here, have at it. Allow yourself for a time to just dwell. It's very easy for a lot of people to become a little bit too addicted to some of these emotions because they feel like, if I let go of this, then I'm letting go for the last time of my friend, my lover, the person who was my soulmate, and I understand that. You're allowed to feel like if you were to not hold on to all this emotion, then you would let go. I'm here to let you know they already have let go, so you're the only one holding on to, this entire experience at this point in time. Yes, I know some of them come back around, but that's ironically usually when you've let go of all this emotional stuff inside of you. Don't ask me why this works, it just happens that way sometimes, and that is not an encouragement for you to try again. But we'll get to that in stage 2 in just a hot second. It is very important to understand that this is really just about allowing yourself slowly but surely to just detach and emotionally process this entire experience. Okay? So that's that aspect. Now, before we talk about stage 2, which is one of my favorite stages of this entire journey, is a point that can set you back to stage 0. And sometimes this happens, it's not a bad thing at all times. It actually can be a pathway out of here for good. Many of you have been dumped by an avoidant partner who will not circle back around, but you will go on to date avoidance again. Many of you will have the boomerang experience that keeps you stuck back in stage 0 for a little while. That's not entirely a bad thing, and you might be wondering, why am I saying this, even though these dynamics aren't good for us? I'll tell you why. Many of you will start to realize there are recurring themes and patterns that keep happening, and this is why you keep getting stuck in this particular dynamic. you will start to notice that if you keep getting stuck back into these experiences again and again and again, you'll be like, okay, there is clearly something internally going on that I need to figure out and fix. If this is truly your one and only time of having this experience and you don't have it happen again, amazing, well done. You're out of this experience for life, I hope. So good for you. But many of us are not so lucky, and I count myself, unfortunately, amongst this mix, so I'm hoping this will be relatable for a lot of you. This is when you need to have a very hard look at yourself. This is when you need to consider, okay, how did I get here? Why am I so intrigued by this kind of person? And there'll be a few reasons for it that come up quite obviously. Part of it will be they look appealing, sexy, charming. They have a lot of the things I want for myself. That's the superficial stuff. 2, there will also be the attachment injury. Many of you have probably grown up with emotionally unavailable caregivers who are like this in one way or another. You will have experienced emotional neglect, which means, frankly, you're very vulnerable to these experiences because you actually haven't received a lot of love, which means that when you have an avoidant partner come in and love bomb the fuck out of you, because that's just the way they relate in the early stages of dating, even if they don't do it immediately, it is going to make you feel like a buffet of love has shown up. And when they dangle that on a string, that's going to be really bad for your emotional well-being. So that's another thing to consider too. When we talk about doing self-love work, I've talked about this quite a few times and said it can be a bit twee and maudlin. Self-love work beyond the basics is not just about showering yourself with compliments. It's actually about getting to know yourself at a very deep and uncomfortable level and actually learning to have greater acceptance of yourself, your wants, and your needs. Beyond doing the simple things like going to the doctors, eating well, getting up on time, going to bed on time, etc., there is actually an element of this which is very deep and also uncomfortable. This is when you then have to take a look at the parts of yourself that want this. This leads to something that I am a big fan of, a term that's used in psychotherapy called unfinished business. Unfinished business can basically be described as if you know that you have a pattern which keeps playing out where it gives you pain, heartbreak, disappointment, regret, anger, whatever, that is a clear sign that something is working on subconsciously that is still at play here, that is keeping you with this experience. This is when it could be like, say, for instance, let's just say you grew up with an emotionally unavailable dad, for the sake of the argument, and your mum enabled that behavior. This might be a situation where you are still trying subconsciously to get acceptance from your emotionally unavailable dad in your partner. Also on top of that too, because of your mum's proclivity to maybe not support you properly, you also have a secret avoidance side of yourself as well too, where you actually get confronted at the idea of losing your sense of freedom, self, and also you don't want to merge with another person, which means that you actually might be disavowing an avoidant side of you, and you actually do want a degree of freedom as well too, and you're not ready to actually be in a proper relationship as well. So there is that aspect. And you may also not be comfortable in true intimacy with another human being. That is quite deep stuff, and it's not for everyone just yet. It's further down the line. A lot of you who are at stage 1 who are still grieving the heck out of this is the sort of like the stuff I'm talking about right now is very much in stage 2, which is where we ask the question, how did we get here? So this is where you do a lot of what I call, analyzing the past to figure out what the heck's going on, why am I here, and learning more about your attachment injuries, the way you show up, and why you might be necessarily drawing these sort of situations together. For example, you might be someone who's actually had minimal to no relationship history prior to this experience. You might be like, I don't understand why I've been so single this entire time. It could very well be because part of you doesn't actually want to be in a relationship. Part of you likes freedom. So there's that aspect as well too. This is when we start to move more in the direction of stage 3. But before we get there are some things that we must also recognize. A lot of us have got a lot of avoidantly attached and emotionally unavailable people around us. Like addicts who are recovering from their addiction, you are probably going to notice that there are a lot of emotionally unavailable people too who are codependent, avoidant, whatever it is, and you're going to see these people everywhere, like you're the main character from The Sixth Sense, and that you see dead people everywhere. Now you're like, I see the trauma everywhere. And at this point, it does feel quite alarming, because it's like, oh shit, I can't unsee this now, like what do I do? So at this stage, you might find it that it's best to be a bit of a hermit for a while, to protect yourself from getting hurt. And this is actually a great opportunity to get educated on trauma. This is a good opportunity to get educated on how to navigate with boundaries, to interact with people, and maybe slowly but surely put yourself back out into dating, and also give yourself the opportunity to just learn how to reject people and to figure this stuff out. So if you can figure that out, wonderful. So there is that element too, which is really important. Now, I just want to bring up my phone because I actually took notes for today that I want to make sure I cover, because this is really important as well too. So during this phase, it's not unsurprising for a lot of people to start stepping back from old friends and family members. Why this is important is because when you recognize the dysfunction that's playing out in your own self and also what's going on, you start to not tolerate it as much in other people. It doesn't mean you necessarily become egotistical and like, oh, I want to basically, excommunicate myself from those of you that are unhealed. No, it's more about being at a point where you're like, you can have greater compassion and empathy for yourself and what you're experiencing, but it may mean that you don't necessarily want to have as close of a relationship with people who aren't working on themselves if their behavior is having a detrimental impact on your well-being. So that's one of the key things there to think about as well too. So what this might mean is you find that if you notice that you've experienced some codependency, fawning behavior, you're someone who's been emotionally unavailable to yourself, you're going to start seeing it very quickly in a lot of people around you. This is like stuff that you figure out much later down the line, so it's one of those things that you've got to figure out too. I can see someone here says, I'm a psychiatrist and I didn't see him as avoidant until the breakup. A lot of us don't. I was working with someone just recently who was like, I knew they were avoidant throughout the entire thing, but even when they broke up with me, part of me was still convinced that they mustn't be avoidant, that they must be secure, because they were saying things like, oh, I've known for a while that I want to break up with you, but I still couldn't bear the thought of missing you. And the feeling I have for you, I'm not sure what it is, but it's not love. And I mean, to me, when I was hearing this, I was thinking, well, I'm just ticking off on my bingo checklist at the moment. But for the person understandably on the receiving end of this, if you're someone who naturally believes what another person is telling you, a loved one is telling you, you might just, not see the forest from the trees in the moment. And it is so normal for that to happen. So in that sense, there's that. As another person says, you can't see it because severe avoidance can present very secure. Also, a lot of severe avoidance, especially when they're breaking up with you, are often convinced that they're making the right decision. And you can take that conviction to be like, oh, they must know what they're talking about. But then if you look at it under the microscope and see it with all the other stuff, it quickly becomes clear that they actually don't really know what they're talking about much of the time as well too. They're often operating from a lot of anxiety, and they don't often make the best decisions for themselves romantically as well too. So it can be very jarring. One thing that I forgot to mention that's also part of this healing experience, and I hope this helps people as well too, is creating a cohesive narrative that helps you understand and also honor your truth of what you've experienced. So much of the time with our avoidant partners, we see them in a good light. The way they show up in the beginning, their acts of service, they're very caring, etc. 2, we also know them for the avoidant side of them that particularly shows up at the end when they suddenly break up with us, right? How do we reconcile this information? Were they using us? Did they truly care? What's the story here? Are they maybe a narcissist? Who knows? This is where to make things a lot easier for a lot of you, and it's hard, initially to get your head around this, but this is really important. You need to come up with a narrative that satisfies your internal system. You could spend hours on the internet searching up all the DSM-5 criteria for what the fuck happened, but there is one system inside of you that will make this so much easier. Go back to your intuition and your emotional system. I found it really easy if you do it like this. Go back to, how did it feel in the early stages of dating? They showed up, they were good? Okay, cool, we'll use that. They seemed enthusiastic. Then, as you got to know them, they started to distance themselves. How did that feel? Oh, it felt like there was a shift, even though the night before they were telling me that they couldn't wait to be my partner, and it feels like there was something that happened quite abruptly, and I could feel it internally, like someone was almost just like pulling away, and it felt really strange. Then they decided to break up with me over text, saying they weren't ready for a relationship and they wished me all the best. How does that feel internally? Confusing, jarring. It just doesn't seem to make sense with the broader narrative of what's happening. So, how do we make sense of this? Well, in a nutshell, if you're able to get your head across it, you might be like, okay, so based on my reality, it would seem like this person did genuinely care in the beginning. There was a lot of attempts to try and escalate us into a relationship, but then once that occurred, a switch happened and they suddenly pulled out and evacuated in a very robotic manner that didn't really feel like it was coming from the same place that was happening previously, right? So, if you are able to feel that, you might have some questions more being like, well, why would someone do this? Great. We can answer those questions being like, well, someone with a fear of intimacy might do that, and it's not necessarily a pattern to you. Then, if we also take a look at some of the other things, you might be like, well, why did they say X but then do Y? Go back to the emotional stuff. Okay, so how are they feeling in that moment? Enthusiastic, yes. But then why would they pull away? Think about it like this. Why would someone who's just said they love you pull away like that? Unless you did something seriously egregious, which usually would take people a minute before they decide to do something about it. Most people, when something egregious has happened, would probably be like, I'm just going to take a gentle step back and tell you why that behavior didn't feel right. They're not usually ready to evacuate a relationship like that. Why would someone have an overreaction like that? It doesn't make any logical sense. So, key thing to think about, if the action isn't logical and able to be explained by, say, the concept of this should just make sense, it's likely an irrational decision, one that has been motivated by emotions, not necessarily motivated by this old noggin here. Well, ironically enough, that is what's being involved, but it's being used in a very back of the brain kind of way. Then, when you put this all together, the story might sound like something like this. I think there was genuine care from this person for me, but they freaked out as things got closer, and instead of being able to confront me about it like a human being who actually was brave enough to actually face things, they decided to just end it all of a sudden out of nowhere. And I think this is what occurred. Were they using you? Based on this story, I'd say on one hand, maybe it felt like I was being used, but I don't think that's how they were necessarily playing it at the end. You've got to understand that this is where people who aren't healing get stuck. And to be completely brutally honest, I see this a lot with Coach Ryan's page, where a lot of people go into a circle jerk of hating their avoidant ex, and they're not actually getting through to the next bit. If you are someone who is going to bypass all the positive things that your avoidant partner did and just focus on the negatives to try and get your brain to compartmentalize the other aspects of this that were good, you are actually doing yourself a humongous disservice, and you are now rearing yourself up for the next avoidant partner to smash you open again. I know that sounds harsh, but you have to understand that real healing is integration. You cannot banish the past and the truth of the experience by pretending it didn't exist. You cannot act like my avoidant partner didn't care if inside of yourself it felt like they did. You have to honor what you experienced. And I know some of you might be like, but it's an act, they didn't care, they're just mimicking you. Were they? Well, I'll tell you what, if they were mimicking me, it didn't feel like that to my system. I gotta tell you, a lot of you are way better at picking up emotional stuff than you think you are. Why do you think it seems so genuine at the start? Oh, could it be that it's real? Why do a lot of you feel like it's hard to pick them up in the beginning because you're not used to this particular flavor of energy? Oh, maybe it's because they're unassuming. The reason why avoidant attachers don't usually hit people's intuition, and I am highly intuitive, I'm a very good energy reader, and I didn't pick it up initially, is because it doesn't set us off. Yes, a lot of us have grown up with these people, but unlike someone who might be someone that you would naturally be set off by and you're like, this person has whack, vile energy and I need to back the fuck away from this person. If you feel with many avoidants, you don't get that. Not at all. Usually, in fact, at the beginning, you're like, this is kind of playful and fun. Might be a sign of arrested development, but that's an entirely different subject for now. The point is, you cannot terminate those memories and those feelings of love and fondness for this person. That must eventually be married with the stuff that you didn't like. I saw someone said, oh, but it's also the good parts that get you stuck as well too. If you're grieving it properly, you won't get stuck there at all. Part of you, the reason why people get stuck in the good is because they think, I'll never meet someone like this again. I still want this person again. I fear that, this person was the greatest person that I'll ever meet. They're still on the pedestal. It's about joining that two together, realizing this person may have been great in a lot of ways, but that 10, 15, even 5% of them destroyed it and got in the way of that too. Both of those seemingly irreconcilable things can coexist in one experience. And I know that's very hard for a lot of you to process. I get it. It took me a while to get there too, but it's the truth. And unfortunately for people, the reason they stay stuck is because they would prefer to stay, in the land of thinking, I was just used, they're a narcissist, they're all evil, they mimic people, they're just using you because that's what they do, they want supply. It's like, even if you were recovering from a narcissistic relationship, I would still encourage you to consider the full human behavior before we necessarily try and pathologize these individuals completely and demonize them as being awful human beings, because that's just the same as making them all good. Marrying the two is important. And this speaks to a bigger problem that I hope people realize in phase 2. We have had a lot of conditioning and black and white thinking. Many of us have grown up on a diet of Disney. We've also learned a lot about relationships that are just outright wrong. And a lot of people who've suffered emotional neglect tend to look to ideas of what love might be from things like Jane Austen novels, romance books, from rom-coms, etc. And it's really hard for a lot of us to feel that, love is something that is based on more of a slow burn, moderate temperature, if you will, than these highs of intensity. We've normalized all the frickin' trauma-bonded aspects of this. We've normalized, let's have the butterflies. If I feel it, if it feels this way, then it must be real love. I'll know it if I feel it. It's like, no, you won't. If I thought that my avoidant exes were the one, then why am I not with any of them in a long-term healthy relationship? And I'm not explicitly talking about myself here. I'm pretty confident a lot of you too have gotten it wrong. It happens. That's just how it is. So, the key thing to understand is we've been really given a lot of shitty information about how love is. The models around us aren't necessarily great either. Also, please bear in mind that a lot of what you see from your friends in relationships may on one hand be fantastic, in which case good for them, they're good role models, but we don't actually have, often at times, healthy, secure relationship role models. Like I've said plenty of times before, and I saw someone quoting it here, I have seen across 99% of the letters that have come to me, intensity as being a huge feature of all of the cases that we have talked about publicly as part of the podcast. When there is intensity, there is likely a lot of emotional dysregulation, there is idealizing, there is fantasy, and many people, frankly, get really hooked in feeling like, this is the one. I know I have, and I've often gone into scarcity thinking when that's happened. Another thing to consider as well too, what was I going to say? Another thing that I wanted to share with people as well, which is huge as part of your phase 2 learning, is please understand that avoidants are real. A lot of you probably think, I just can't wrap my head around how someone could be afraid of love. How could someone in one breath say, it is never my intention to break up with you, only to then horrifically break up with me out of nowhere last minute? It just doesn't make any sense. I'm just going to quote Game of Thrones and say, if you thought this had a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention. Because unfortunately, people like this exist. Is it a harsh reality? Yes. It's not to say life is bad, life is miserable, life is just awful. No, it's just to say that unfortunately, these individuals do exist and you have to be wary of them, because if they're not working on themselves, you're in trouble, and it's also setting yourself up for further pain. So please bear in mind that in these kind of cases, you have to understand that this is just the reality of who these individuals are. I know some people I've seen have sworn off attachment theory. They're like, oh, attachment theory is not a thing. Oh, like avoidance is just a name for emotional immaturity. No. It is actually a very, in my opinion, serious, just as anxious attachment is, sign of attachment injury. And if we don't take attachment injury seriously, we are still in the throes of very addiction-like-esque behavior that leaves us stuck in unsatisfying, unfulfilling, disappointing relationships, not just in romantic settings, but also in friendships and jobs and many other things as well too. So feel free to use phase 2 as an audit for yourself, an audit for life, but it is also a very important period of time maybe to also date a little bit again and just see what's going on out there, because you will probably realize very quickly you now not only recognize avoidance that you're dating, but you're probably also going to realize at some points too, oh, I've actually got a pattern of maybe picking these people up and it just seems like there's avoidance everywhere. Yeah, there can be a lot of avoidance everywhere, but I'm going to share a little controversial opinion. I think dating coaching and dating in general is kind of pointless if you're doing it properly. Like, I think that a lot of the time there's actually no need for a lot of this stuff, because when you get to phase 3 and then eventually 4, much of this stuff kind of feels irrelevant. So let's go into some of the stuff now for phase 3, which is where things get so exciting at an individual level. So after we move from the how did this happen, we then get to go to phase 3, which is parts work or integration, or when we start to do a lot of inner work and proper inner work. Usually a lot of people who go to therapy will do a lot of good talk therapy, they'll get psychoeducated, they'll be validated, but then when you eventually get to this stage, this is where things actually start to occur. You'll get to a point where you realize, and this is one thing that I love telling my clients when they're ready to hear it, it was never about the avoidant partner. A lot of you who are in stage 1, hell, stage 0, I know you feel like it's your avoidant partner and it feels like they're the one who caused all this pain. They definitely press the buttons, I'm not going to lie about that, and you'll feel that way. You have every right to feel that way. But eventually you will get to a stage where you realize it was not actually about them. This is a very bitter pill to swallow, because then you realize, oh shite, I have some things that I need to work on. So, what does parts work and integration look like? So, for those of you who are unfamiliar with internal family systems therapy or even psychosynthesis, this is where we look at human beings under the concept that we all have different, like, sub-personalities, if you will, that make up our whole. The inner critic is a great example of one of these many personality types. In IFS, that would be called a protector part. So the protector parts are there to try and help us avoid shame, avoid feelings of embarrassment, humiliation, guilt. They're really those psychological parts of the brain area which are trying to protect us from adverse emotional experiences and unnecessary pain. And the what if monster is another classic example of that one as well too. So when you're working through a lot of that psychological stuff, you'll then eventually get down to the more uncomfortable stuff, which is where all the shame is, where you actually feel like the unlovability. You feel, and this is where we'll go back and be like, okay, so that feeling you feel in your body, how old does that feel? Oh, it feels like 10 years old. What was going on at 10 years old that made you feel this way? Oh, you were bullied? Okay, tell me more about that. What was coming up for you? What was that emotional experience? So how does this relate to attachment injury? So when people have experienced these adverse experiences, bit of a weird sentence there. Basically what happens is, in romantic relationships, for instance, say if, a great example, enmeshment, we've got an avoidant man, right? Who's basically bitching about all of his past partners, saying, I gave them everything and it was never enough. they're dead to me. On the surface, it just sounds like they've had a rough time with previous partners. The women they dated, they must have been really hard to be with, right? But to me, I can suss out that there's something going on there that's way deeper beneath the surface. And so when I hear that, it might suggest, like in that outburst, there might actually be a 10-year-old inside of them that's frustrated with the memories of an overbearing mum who was never happy enough with what he tried to do for her. That is the part that needs to be resolved. Why? Because when you are in a situation where you're dating I can see someone here's kind of cut to the end, which is funny. When this man is in a romantic relationship with a woman who might be actually a good partner for him, when he is made to feel unworthy, when he's made to feel like he's getting more intimate with her, when she just asks him, a very simple question like, hey, what are your intentions with dating? Where is this going? What are your thoughts with regards to commitment? That part of him might come out like a leopard emerging from his mouth, being like, I don't want to be controlled. I have no intention of giving up my apartment and moving in with you, even if she never actually talked about moving in. That lovely little bit of trauma responsive stuff that's going on there, we can trace that way back to good old 10-year-old little boy. And if that part isn't resolved, that is going to detrimentally get in the way of his capacity to be committed to this woman. And as this one person said, it was so funny. They said, then this avoidant man will go back to presumably, a toxic ex, yes, or also his mum, because that's where the unfinished business is. So there's that element as well too. So the same can be said too for anxious attachers. Why do we go back to these avoidant partners? Why do we chase them? Well, for a lot of us, it may be the 5, 8, 10, 12, 14-year-old that, they're like, our definition of love is chase. We have to prove ourselves for love because that was what was modeled for us as kids. We may not actually have a solid sense of self-worth because we were never made to feel worthy just for being enough as we are. It was always a set of conditions for who we are. So there's that. There's also the possibility that there's an inner teenager in there, who doesn't want a proper, committed relationship. They want to, date someone who's a bit of a bad boy, a bit of a bad girl, bad person, if you will, because they're like, oh, this is my rebellion. Fuck being in a family. I don't want to date anyone who's going to have a family. Screw that. So there's that element as well too. It's really important to understand that we have so many parts of us that probably want this because that's our unfinished business. And it's important to get to know these experiences and work up so that way we can actually not date more of these people down the road as well too. And we can actually get better feeling more comfortable with loneliness, feeling more comfortable with proper people who, actually are healthy for us. And also we can actually have secure and beautiful intimate relationships with people who want us. So that's stage 3. And it's a glorious stage. If I'm completely honest, one day I hope not to talk about avoidant attachment as much as I am right now and actually to talk more about that. Because I got to tell you, it is a fabulous day in my sessions when my clients are wanting to do a bit of a deep dive into the emotional stuff. I'm like, oh my God, yes, this is so cool. So just wanted to say it's a wonderful day when people want to take accountability for their emotional well-being. Not to say everyone doesn't, but it's just to say everyone's at different stages of where it's at. I kind of get a little bit tired sometimes when I'm psychoeducating people on avoidant attachment because I'm like, here we go again. It's just another avoidant. And it's like, this is what they do. They're great human beings who have the capacity to destroy you because of their fears of intimacy. And that's it in a nutshell, really. And yes, sometimes they can act like an asshole. Two things can be true at once. Then glorious stage 4, which is where you find a lot of things work out in a way that's almost spiritual. In fact, it is. So stage 4, bear with me for the last part of this because this is the part that gets a little bit woo, but believe me when I say it's a thing and it's very exciting. So this is where you find your purpose. This is where you really find yourself as well too. having seen this at play now with clients and, a lot of people at play, including myself, I think this is something that I always get very excited by, which is many of you, when you start to do a lot of this inner work, will actually find proper joy in following a pursuit of work that you've maybe never even thought about doing. I had a client the other day who I'd worked with for about a couple of years who specializes in sports therapy, and they were saying how after the breakup with their avoidant, they became increasingly interested in ways in which in physiotherapy, when they're working with clients, they've noticed that their clients aren't actually experiencing real injuries. What's happening is that they're in the freeze response and they've got all this chronic pain because the emotional stress has just gone to certain parts of the body and become a form of chronic pain. And they found that as they got their clients to lie down and go back into their parasympathetic rest and digest, all that pain manifested as like an emotional outburst where the client was basically just tearing up and needed to process a lot of that emotional pain. Very similar stuff happens in yoga as well too. It can be very therapeutic. And my client was saying that they were really feeling this sense of excitement and passion at sort of pursuing more of that. The somatic work combined with their skill set and joy of, sports physiotherapy. This is where, I've kind of gone into this field myself, not, consciously. It was just something that I was like, this is really good. Many, many people who heal off the back of these experiences go off to become, sometimes healers, sometimes people who are very proactive in wanting to do more work for other people as well too. And, I know it's a bit of a cliche term, a bit of a, an eyebrow-raising term, but it's true that many people do become a bit of light workers. They want to go on and actually have fulfilling roles to help other people overcome attachment injuries and a lot of, stuff that's going on internally. So often I find many people, when they start to heal a lot of that trauma and all of that stuff that's inside of them, they find their purpose. Going back to what I said earlier, which my little controversial statement that dating is pointless, is to say that eventually when you're following what you love, you, funnily enough, find your crowd that are actually good for you, and you might actually find that these people are better for you. Many people I've spoken to, I've got a team member who found their, their soulmate, if you want to call it that, their partner who they're very happy with, from someone who was also at a similar stage in life who was ready for them as well too. I have a friend who found their partner just recently, where things seem to be going well for the moment, so fingers crossed it's all going well, and they're not avoidantly attached. They're actually, which is not to say avoidant attached people are bad necessarily, it's just to say that these individuals don't have severe avoidant attachment injuries. So there is life after these experiences, and you will find people, when you're ready for it, who can actually meet you with where you're at. So that's why I strongly, urge people to consider healing, because there is a lot of joy that comes off the back of it, but it's a slow and steady process. I know a lot of people online love to try and rush you there, try and get you there as quickly as possible, but you've really got to take your time working through the muck. If you're at stage 0, or even at stage 3, 4, 5, 2, doesn't matter. You're exactly where you need to be, and that's where the work needs to be, because there is a lot of stuff there for you that you just need to work on. I saw someone say they're still at stage 0. That's fine. You're allowed to be there. But I think the key thing I would say that helps everyone through this is radical acceptance of where you're at. A lot of people think they're further ahead. A lot of people think they're totally fine when they're clearly in a very trauma-bonded situation. Unfortunately, the body keeps the score, and you will know. Even if, I'll tell you what, your body will know, even if you're not willing to admit it. So that's an important thing to think about. I can see someone here is saying, is it possible that we fluctuate between stages? Yes, but progress is never lost. I often find a lot of people think to themselves, oh no, I've lost all that progress I got with another avoidant and I've been heartbroken. Oh no, my avoidant did a double discard, triple discard, quadruple, whatever it was, the millionth discard on me. I feel like I'm just going backwards. You're allowed to feel that way. But do you know what's really funny is that even after the gazillionth discard, something is usually happening. People are getting to a point where they're just disappointed, burnt out, bored, getting the ick with their partner who keeps doing this, and eventually they get to a stage where they're like, yeah, I'm done, bye. I have to tell you, even though I was someone who never got boomeranged, and I'm very grateful for that, to be completely honest, I actually have tremendous love and respect for the people who are getting boomeranged. And not because I wish that upon you, but because usually, having worked with a lot of people who are in affairs, and having worked with a lot of people who are boomeranged, there is something very powerful to accepting your situation for what it is and having to slowly but surely work your way out in your own time out of these dynamics where you realize this isn't healthy anymore. And you get there slowly but surely. And the funny thing is, you may actually find, because you're going through this process, you not only recognize avoidancy now much better than people who've just had a sudden blindside, and they don't get a boomerang experience, but you also understand more about yourself and what leads you to these experiences. So in many ways, the pain of these experiences, though addictive, can be a phenomenal teacher that might actually skyrocket you from like 0-1 to stage 2. So even though you might feel like you're extremely behind, if we want to use timelines, which I don't recommend, you're actually not. So there is that aspect as well too. All right, I'm going to round out my little TED talk here and transition to Q und A, and then I'm going to go to bed. So let's do this. And by the way, before I continue, I know there's one person in the crowd who's been commenting quite regularly who I know is very committed to their no contact and have done a very good job. I was just going to say, to a lot of you who are, still in a state of self-protection off the back of what you've experienced, it's totally fine. It's a phase. You'll eventually let your walls down again, and you'll feel proper off the back of this too. So anyways, let's go through the questions. For those of you that have asked questions, throw them in the question mark box, because it's a little bit exhausting for me to go through the chat, even though I love watching the comments and the fact that you guys are doing therapy in the chat, which is always funny. All right, let's do this. I left my dismissive avoidant. I'm completely devastated. It was 2.5 months ago, but I'm worse than ever. I feel after 18 months I could have been more patient. He lied to me over Instagram girls and didn't fully remove them all despite knowing how it was affecting me. He's now unfollowed me. Okay, I have a lot to say to this one. Firstly, I am really sorry that you're going through this, because even when we leave our partners, I wonder if I can just tap this up there. Yeah, I can. I know that it can feel extremely painful for us when we're the ones to choose to leave these relationships with dismissive avoidance. In fact, often through their actions, they're pushing us away. They are almost forcing us to leave these experiences because they're refusing to change, and they're too cowardly to just end it themselves as well too. And so there's that aspect. You can still miss the fuck out of him. The connection hasn't been properly healed or, processed at this particular point in time. So I can understand if you miss the heck out of him, even though he was doing things that were breaching the boundaries of this relationship. And you can probably still feel a lot of betrayal from him for the way in which he was allowing himself to follow other girls on social media and make you feel like you weren't being chosen. That's a very understandable reason for actually bringing that up to him. I know you've mentioned here, I feel after 18 more months, I could have been more patient. I'm going to now be a little bit on the tough love side, which is to say, and exactly how much longer were you willing to be patient? Please bear in mind that a lot of us are far too tolerant of these experiences. People with attachment injuries have a tendency to bend over backwards for terrible behavior at times, and we don't learn our limits. Based on what I'm reading here, you actually hit your limits on multiple occasions, and maybe looking back at this one day, you'll realize I didn't need to be more patient. When I read this, I actually think, I know why you feel like you could have been more patient, because you feel like you could have done more to be more sympathetic, empathetic. I could have, at the very least tried to work more with this avoidant attachment. I'm just going to say, as an observer, take what I'm about to say with a pinch of salt. At 18, with more, I don't think that was going to improve after more time. I really don't. People need to learn this skill. It's a hard one, but it's a good one. You need to make executive judgments on behalf of your relationships with partners. If some people aren't able to come up to where you need them to be, you have every right to be like, right, we're done. And I know some of you might be like, well, isn't that what the avoidant is doing? No. They are overreacting. You are at a point where you've voiced your opinions, you've shared your concerns. If they're not able to make you feel safe, seen, heard, and at the very least respected in your relationship, then what is waiting another month going to do to improve the situation? Realistically, what is it going to do? You know, it's one of those things where we've really got to learn our limits. Unfortunately, it's experiences like this which often teach us our limits. So that's why you've got to be careful with this. I want to throw this out there to the fearful avoidance in my crowd. You lot, I love you lot, but your limits are in space. Please bring them back down to earth. I know a lot of you have suffered monstrous amounts of trauma growing up and you didn't deserve it. It's one of those things where a lot of you, I find, need to learn, and it's a hard pill to learn, but it's a good one. A lot of fearful avoidant attachers must accept and learn that what's been done to them is abusive, is not okay, and you do not require, bad intentions from a partner to be mad at them. Too often I find a lot of people, and it's not just fearful avoidance, say, well, I can't be mad at my ex because they didn't intend to hurt me. And a lot of us didn't intend to cause harm to people, yet we still can be harmed by people's actions and do harm to others. It is still up to us to make sure that we take into consideration how we behave. I'll give you a little personal example. There was a time where a while ago, many moons ago, in fact 10 years ago, I know the way that I was coming across to certain people did not feel good to others, and they told me, and I amended my behavior. Now, was it my intention to cause harm and impact to people that I was behaving in a particular way with? Not at all. But would it have been okay to continue when I was getting clear feedback? No. So, at the same time, if you've said you liking, following, just hoarding a bunch of women on social media makes me feel like I am being disrespected in my relationship and I don't feel comfortable, was getting completely ignored, then I don't think that is an unreasonable reason to be upset and angry at them. It is actually probably a sign that they might actually have a bit of a sex or porn addiction issue going on the periphery, and there's nothing more that you can do in that particular stage if you've called it out and there's nothing more. There's no willingness to change. No. I want to throw it out there and say, I worry that a lot of you hear avoidant attachers saying, please be patient with me. Do not wait on their timeline because you'll be waiting indefinitely. They're not saying this to be misleading. They are not saying this to try and fuck with you necessarily. It's just that they have tremendous resistances to getting close, and they know it. They may not know where it comes from. They may not know why it's there, but understand that just being told, be patient with me, is not actually the signs and evidence that they're going to therapy to work on that stuff. You have to understand that if someone isn't taking action to work on this stuff, we can be patient until Jesus comes back, but if I recall correctly, that's taken us quite a while. So I'm just saying gently, you don't have to rate around if someone is saying be patient. You get to decide how long enough is enough. But once again, I understand that even when we call it quits, even when we learn enough is enough, I understand there is a big grieving process that happens off the back of this. You're allowed to grieve, you're allowed to be mad, you're allowed to be confused. It's just part of the experience, I'm afraid. That's just how it goes. Anyways, let's do another question. My ex hasn't returned my... I always love this question. My ex hasn't returned my personal belongings yet. He ignored the request I sent 2 months after the breakup. Why does he do that? Is there any chance to get my stuff back? I love this question. All right, let's do it. Why do I love it? Because this is when I can clearly see some of the underlying motivations that are here that are not so obvious. So, one, you've tried to get some of your stuff back and he's still holding on to it. I wouldn't be surprised if this guy was also incredibly robotic, adamant, and sure of himself when he broke up with you, or at the time when you broke up with him. So, this is the funny conundrum. This sort of behavior is right up there with when the avoidant ex is still stalking your socials and you're like, what the fuck is going on? This is a very common experience that happens to so many people, and I've quoted it happening a few times. I've seen so many avoidant exes holding on to letters, photos, teddy bears, keys, clothes, you name it. Because why? Because they're still obsessed with their ex. And not to quote Olivia Rodrigo, but the thing is, what you've got to understand about avoidant attachers and this sort of stuff is we've now entered the land of it's opposite day. Avoidant attachers would, English, let me start that again. They don't often want to admit that they actually have repressed feelings for the exes that they remove themselves from. So often, it's a sign that they actually haven't dealt with loss and grief properly. It may look like they're sure of what they're doing. They know that they don't want me. No, they don't. When they're in their free state and they seem confident that they know what they're doing, they don't. They think they do, but they don't. Why? Because of this. They cannot handle proper grief. They cannot handle proper loss. That is why they hold on to these things. Because even though they like the distance, they like to control the intimacy. Again, this is a severe crowd. Holding on to the belongings, keeping you on their social media under their control is their way of maintaining access to you. And until they properly lose you, then they don't have to grieve this relationship's ending. These are human beings. They still have to grieve. They still have to go through that. And they're delaying this as much as they can in their power, even when they think they're getting away from it. Compartmentalization, unfortunately, ain't more powerful than the power of grief over these situations. So, yeah. So, I can see this person's ad. He returned money he owed, but despite that, there's something very valuable and something I really need from this stuff that's there. Yeah, this is just their stubbornness to let go of a lot of this stuff, unfortunately. So in terms of how to get this back, you may actually need a third party. You may need to step it up. You may need to get, whatever help you need to get this back, because their resistance to doing it is staggeringly high. They are now operating from a 5-year-old, 10-year-old who still wants to hold on to your stuff because they don't want to let it go, and they're not going to return it to you, easily. If you go and see them and ask them to, give your stuff back, they'll probably be highly robotic and deeply ashamed. And I've heard plenty of accounts of avoidants who've done this where they will say to you in reflection, that was the hardest thing I ever had to do. And I felt like I didn't feel good about doing that. And you might be like, well, why the hell did you look so shut down and robotic? It made me feel like I was a complete stranger. When they're shut down, they're going to feel like a complete stranger because they are trying to manage their own emotional distress. I can see someone here says it feels like a control tactic. This is not a mentally secure person. Well, in a way, you're not wrong, because it's someone who's trying to forcefully control their emotions in the situation, but do not have a bandwidth for distress, and are trying to stubbornly prove that they don't need you when they kind of do. So yeah, unfortunately, this is one of those situations where you might actually have to get third parties involved. I had a similar client situation as you. They had to get a friend to talk to their ex to get it sorted out. It was a nightmare, to say the least. So I'm going to say this to you as gentle advice. Be assertive, get it sorted out, ramp it up if you need to, because at the end of the day, if you don't try and, manage this, you're not going to get it back. So that's that. All right. Oh, I can see someone here says, leave his own house, finally realizing his behavior is not about me. Welcome to the rest of us. And for those of you that aren't there yet, don't worry, you'll get there eventually too. I love it when people realize this. But you know what I love even more is when we realize how much this actually is to do with other stuff internally. Anyways, I can see this person says, I told him I'll reach out to his mum if he doesn't return my stuff. Good on you. That is a very good way to go about it. All right. Next person. Is it normal to experience the grieving process you've described not as a linear process, but as intertwining parts of it as a whole process, not separated by those specific phases? Thanks in advance. I'm going to say yes, question mark, because, okay, so we go back to the phases that I was talking about. Stage 0, 1 to 5. 1 to 4, sorry. There's no 5 yet, unless we meet God. Yes, because you can sort of like go through bits and pieces of them. Like, for example, you might learn as you're in stage 0 how you're actually highly, you have parts of you that are highly codependent. And so you might be learning while you're in the thick of the shit that, oh yeah, I can see the writing on the walls for myself and my partner now. So yes, that could happen. But you won't probably get to stage 3 or 4 nearly as much if you haven't healed a lot of this stuff. So I'd say invariably I find people oscillate between stage 0, 1, and 2, and you really want to get out of that, in your own time, obviously. But yes, that's my answer to your question. Next question. With healing, what is the goal when it comes to emotions and how you reflect back at the relationship with the fearful avoidant ex? I'm assuming that last part of your question is, how do you reflect back those emotions to your ex? Or is it more of a case of, how do I reflect back on my experiences of the relationship? So I'll answer both of those in addition to the first part. What is the goal when it comes to emotions? Processing. So, damn, I don't have my journal. Oh, this will do. This isn't my journal, this is my dream journal. So this is my form of emotional regulation. I strongly recommend people have either tapping, journaling, voice note recording, video recording. You need to have, something to just dump your emotional stuff onto. Why is this important? Because what's suppressed remains repressed, and you'll be depressed. So I strongly recommend that you find something to get a lot of this stuff out of your system. And also it's part of the work in terms of getting to know yourself. I'm just noticing there's a moth in my room and I hope it's not a cockroach. So, thank you. Yeah, this journal's really cute. I've had this for a while now. It's actually for whenever I have dreams and I need to write it down. Because sometimes I find, and this relates, when it comes to like dream journaling, for instance, often I find that that's often cues for me from like my subconscious where I'm like, I need to start writing stuff down because I find it relates to something I haven't processed yet. So that's why I've got it. I'm also the kind of guy where I tend to have the odd nightmare every now and then, and I'm like, okay, thanks for the trauma reminder. Let me just write that down. So that's a thing. I can see someone here's written, I dump everything on ChatGPT. Listen, if that works for you and it's able to process it, fantastic. I'm not against that. I personally don't use ChatGPT, not because I don't want it. Well, actually, it's because I don't want it. But anyways, it's up to everyone to find their thing, so that's totally fine. Now, when you say, how do I reflect that back at the relationship? Okay, so let's talk about this if you're reflecting it back to an ex. Let's say you've realized something about your emotions. You're like, okay, listen, I know that I am someone who gets frustrated when I don't hear back from you consistently. I know this comes from the fact that I have had experiences with unattuned caregivers. Not a good feeling. Long story short, just appreciate more consistency. That's how I would do it. Short, sweet, to the point. You don't need to give them the entire fucking backstory. You just need to give them the salient points. And that's basically it. So that's how I would do it. Now, if you were to go to the other side of this, and how do I reflect back on the relationship and the emotions that I had? I think the bigger picture would be, how did I get into this relationship? And what were some of the driving influences that led me here? That's a hard question for a lot of people to answer. A lot of people would love to say, well, it was just bad luck. And on one hand, yeah, there would have been a bit of that, but as a lot of us come to realize, there's less of luck at play and more the fact that we're allowing ourselves to be in these dynamics. So there is that. Anyways, a conversation for another time. I want to just take a moment here to say, when it comes to accountability, this is a very prickly subject in my opinion. No one deserves the experiences they've gone through, either in childhood or with these traumatic relationships, right? You did not deserve to be treated this way. Full stop, no discussion. Much of the time, if we're talking exclusively about the severe avoidant cases where, you did the best you could. You may have had a few moments of being emotionally, dysregulated. We get it. That happens every now and then too. But if you can look at the back of this with your hand on your heart and look back on it and go, I did the best I could with the knowledge that I had, and I don't think I was being too unreasonable, fine. I don't think there's anything unrealistic or unreasonable about that. But there will come a point where, unfortunately, and I say this for all trauma survivors out there, it is unfortunately your responsibility and your accountability to make sure, one, this doesn't happen again, and two, the things that led you to this, that have contributed to this, do not repeat themselves so you don't have to experience more unnecessary suffering. So this is where, as this one person says, it's not bad luck when you can see patterns in the kinds of people you fall in love with. You got it. Because that's the thing you have a degree of control over. And if you want to stick your head in the sand and be like, my avoidant this, my avoidant that, great. Well, if you want to have an extended period in the rage part of this experience, go ahead. You're welcome to do that. But unfortunately, that's not healthy. Now, for those of you who are fresh to the anger cycle, don't worry, you're not going to be there forever. It's a fun phase, enjoy it. I particularly love it. But it's just to say that if we're looking at the anger phase in isolation, and you're just being angry for the sake of being angry, and you want to be addicted to the anger because it makes you feel like you can protect yourself, and you're like, oh, I get to feel this way because I don't have to feel sad anymore. That's bypassing, and that's not going to help you heal. So anyways, that's that. So there is that aspect. All right. I can see someone here. Congratulations. I want to just congratulate this person. They've said, guys, after 6 months of therapy, I talked to him and watched his pattern and did not react. Seriously, good on you. That's huge. I know for me that I've definitely gone through experiences where I've gone back to people who've abused me and I've been like, oh, there's my unfinished business. I need to go and work on that. So if you find yourself, this is a really clear example of when people go back to stage 0. If you find yourself constantly going back to an avoidant ex, that's okay within reason, of course, unless, of course, you just want to pretend like everything's hunky-dory. If you realize that if you're doing it intentionally, I don't mind, because I know that a lot of you are being very strategic about this. If you find yourself going back because you still have this emotional thing you want to say to them, you want to be like, I want to just get this off my chest, not from a closure perspective, from an ego perspective. When it comes from that place of, I just want to one-up them, I just want to prove to them that they're wrong, that's unfinished business talking. If you're doing it from this place of like, I actually just need to let them know how their behavior really hurt me, and I don't plan on looking back regardless of what happens, that's fine, that's empowered, you're allowed to do that. If it's this whole thing of like, oh, I need to just like point out how avoidant they are, that they're miserable, that they've done this thing and I need to show them that I've won and they've lost me, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, let's not do that. Ideally. If it happens, it happens. I mean, that's right up there with the revenge fantasy sort of things where it's like, I'm going to, send them anthrax in the mail. I'm going to slash the tires. I'm going to, report them to the Immigration Affairs Office for their visa status and stuff like that. I'm going to basically report them to the police for sexual harassment they haven't committed. I'm like, that's just you projecting a lot of your anger from a parent or whoever's abused you in the past onto them. Like, just no, don't do that. That's silly. So anyways, that's answering that question. Let's keep going. Are they aware of their manipulation during the relationship? When he broke up with me, he asked me if I thought he was manipulative. Yes and no. So this is sort of where things get very case by case. So it could be a case that he actually thinks he's manipulative in certain situations, but at times we can do behavior that's manipulative without even realizing it. So I'd say, without necessarily shaming this person and being like, they're a manipulator, I'd say sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends on a few things. Have they been called out for being manipulative before and not done anything about it? In which case I'd say, oh yeah, that's manipulative. 2, are they just coming to this realization for the first time and starting to think, yeah, maybe I actually am being manipulative? I'd say, I'm willing to let them off the hook. I'm not saying they shouldn't work on themselves, but I'm willing to say, maybe they're just realizing this for the first time. So it sort of depends on the context of the situation. Some people, unfortunately, innocently don't know a lot of this stuff, whilst other people have been told this multiple times and they keep doing it. I have less clemency for the latter example. All right, next question. This is a good one. Do avoidants get jealous when you start a new relationship even though they discarded you? Hell yeah, abso-fucking-lutely. If you move on from someone and... I'll go back to the manipulative question in a minute. If you move on, even if an avoidant is in a new relationship, oh yeah. You gotta understand, with people who are particularly like severe in their attachment injuries, particularly severe DAs and especially dismissive leaning FAs, oh yeah. They can have a lot of repressed jealousy come shooting out of the surface. It's also combined with their fear of loss, because a lot of them fear losing you as well too. So in that context, if you're someone who's moved on from an avoidant partner, like let's just say they've dumped you, they've gotten with someone new, and you're moving on to be with someone new, just watch them. Just, absolutely watch them, try and, get back with you at some point or another. Or if they don't, they may be in a bit of a depressive malaise where they're just like, I can see they've moved on and they're so happy without me. I want to be back with them, but I don't actually have I don't believe that they want to be with me. It just won't work out. It just wouldn't be fair. It's very nebulous, so to speak, in terms of like whether they'll take action. I find the dismissive avoidants almost give up on themselves and give up on the relationship entirely. They're just like, it wouldn't work out anyways. They've moved on. They look so much happier now without me. Some will go back around, but yeah, jealousy, oh yeah, that's there. Just because avoidant attachers look as cool as a cucumber doesn't mean they are. Especially the dismissive leaning FAs. They have a tendency to be quite spiky. So yeah. Going back to the previous question, it was about manipulation and being called manipulative. The avoidant in question. So the question was basically like, hey, do these avoidant attachers know that they're being manipulative? And this person added an extra bit to that, which I thought was very funny, which was, they said, my ex's mum called them manipulative. And I had a little chuckle internally as I read that, because I thought, that's funny. Like, if your mum is calling you manipulative, and let's just say that it's for valid things, then you're being manipulative. And to me in that moment, him being like, do you think I'm being manipulative? He clearly doesn't like feeling like a bad person. He's got shame wounds. And yes, he definitely is being manipulative. Now, to whether he would admit to calling it manipulation is an entirely different subject. Some people can be in the thickest of denial and think that, what I'm doing isn't bad. Like, oh God. I've heard some debates with people who tell their avoidant partner, what you did was love bombing. And they'll be like, what I did was perfectly normal. What I did is just how love is between people. Again, fantasy thinking, idealization, their distorted view of what, love making actually is. It's like, there's no, wanting to take ownership of their stuff. It's just like, this is just how I am. So, it is really funny. All right, I can see someone here has asked me a very interesting question. I had such a transformative experience, spiritual and physical, after experiencing profound love with my fearful avoidant. She evidently avoided. What is this experience exactly? Thank you. I love this question so much because I always like to flex the spiritual stuff too every now and then. All right, so let's talk about this. And this is a very important thing to talk about. Yes, these experiences can be highly transformative and feel very spiritual. Why? We may not necessarily have language to describe why these experiences are the way they are like this. So let's look at this in a bit of a holistic way. At a neurobiological level, we would say things like, well, there's a lot of dopamine. Well, there's a lot of oxytocin. Well, your nervous systems are firing off because you've got a lot of, inner child stuff going on. And basically in neuroscience, it would basically say, there's a lot of familiarity there. The butterflies are going off. You're both feeling a lot of intense anxiety and, euphoria for each other, right? So that's one aspect of this experience. They'll basically say this is just the chemicals doing their thing. Now, if that's to be believed and we reduce this to the power of science, we would simply just say, well, it's two magnetized nervous systems basically reacting off each other. This isn't true love, it's just attraction, right? That's one aspect of it. A very dry, boring way of basically reducing these experiences to nothing more than a bit of emotional overwhelm, right? I choose to believe that they're a bit more special than that. So let's move into the slightly more psychodynamic part of this. It's true that often we see that two people who've come from very similar backgrounds get together and their trauma comes out in one way or another. What should be a beautiful opportunity of two inner children coming together and recognizing their stuff and healing and growing often turns into the basis of trauma and a lot of pain. And this is where things then go into a slightly more spiritual angle, which frankly is what I believe in its totality. Yes, these experiences are hugely transformative. If we look at astrological science, for instance, which I'm still a beginner in, you could look up your chart for when you met, for instance, your fearful avoidant ex, and you will often see how your chart might have been lit up extremely, like in major ways, where, I don't know how to describe it, like the aspects and the synastries were just like popping off and you were getting a lot of significant growth in your chart. Now, how does this translate to you in real time? Like, what does this experience mean? Well, it means, it likely was a spiritual experience. According to some people who have had past life or regression therapy, they'll realize, oh yeah, this avoidant partner of mine was actually, it was actually a bit of a twin flame experience. Like, they were here to teach me something, but they weren't here to be in my life for the rest of time. So for those of you who are, believing in the whole twin flame narrative, there can be a bit of truth to that. So there is that aspect. But I can see someone here says, oh my God, seriously, I just fell into the twin flame hole the last month. That is a hole you want to walk out of. Don't stay there forever. This is not the time for excessive magical thinking. But when we go back to the spiritual side of this too, how does growth feature in this? If we take the spiritual stuff and put it to one side, we put the scientific stuff to one side, what a lot of you are getting is a tremendous amount of new profound awareness, because what's often happened is your ego has been fucking destroyed. So you're much more open to humility, to self-awareness, to looking at yourself and being like, holy shit, I see myself in ways that I never saw myself before. I see the world differently to how I heal before. And so as a consequence, you may find that when you look at this, you end up feeling a lot more, because you're feeling so much pain, you're actually often connecting with a lot of stuff inside of you that you haven't been feeling before. Often what this does for a lot of people is it temporarily takes them out of the high functioning freeze that a lot of you have been in. So now your feelings have just skyrocketed, and essentially you're now feeling a lot of intense emotions that are usually out of your control. And so in many ways, it's breaking that cycle of being numb, of being really intensely, hurt by stuff that you might have repressed when you were younger. So in many ways, this is giving you access to your emotional experience again, even though it's overwhelming and too much for a lot of you to bear initially. And it does send you back into the freeze for a little bit. But the point simply is to say is that, yes, this is transformative. And whether we look at it under a spiritual lens or even a neurobiological one, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is that it is often, as we find with suffering in general, the basis for growth and also for transforming ourselves. So that's why this happens. So in that context, take what I've said with a pinch of salt for those of you that have liked bits and pieces of what I've shared, but this is how it is. I remember, when I've read out some of these letters, some of the features can be very magical and spiritual. I think, a lot of, I remember, one instance where there was a story between, I think his name was Daniel or Luke, and this girl, Sarah, and this guy off the back of it found that he actually had some powers of like clairvoyance off the back of this. So yeah, some people have even reported actually becoming quite, psychic off the back of these experiences as well too. I know some of this sort of dwells in the realms of magical thinking, but here's the thing you gotta understand about the way I operate with a lot of this stuff too. The science is fucking slow. Don't get me wrong, I love good evidence-based stuff, but part of healing is also developing a good belief system outside of a lot of that stuff too. One of the things I like about tarot, because someone mentioned it, is it's great for introspection. It's really important to understand that even in 12-step recovery programs, they use spiritual, belief systems, religious adjacent texts to help people get grounded and connect back with themselves through their recovery. It's not about organized religion. It's not about, having things that are necessarily about finding, a god to replace your system of like understanding and wealth. It's not about that. It really is just about allowing yourself to practice, a bit of imagination, a bit of creative thinking, and also having ways to introspect in some alternative methods too. I know a therapist who actually gets her clients to step into their astrological chart from time to time and actually embrace some of the planets that they might normally be resistant to, because it can be a good form of shadow work at times too. So there you go. All right, let's continue. I know that was a bit of a long answer to that question, but it requires, I feel, like a bit of a sophisticated answer. I can see someone here said, tarot has been helping me. I'd never had tarot readings before, and they all said the same things. Now I truly believe it. Yep, I agree. I'm a tarot reader. I love my tarot readings, and, one of the best things about them is the way it can also help you get in touch with your intuition. So strongly recommend it. A lot of you might find that you enjoy not only cards, like oracle cards, tarot cards, you might find that you like adjacent forms of stuff like astrology, like I said too, or trying to think, Reiki is another one as well too. Again, or mushrooms or ayahuasca. Look, again, these aren't necessarily mainstream forms of therapy. The inner work still needs to be done, but these can assist. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that as well too. The last thing I'll say before I bounce from this topic is I have been finding crazy amounts of like coincidences with the science of astrology with the work we do with clients, particularly pertaining to attachment injury. It's just stupidly insane how there can be a lot of similarities there. So I'm not talking about the pop astrology of horoscopes. Like when you're getting like natal charts, and also when you're looking at house placements and stuff like that, and you're actually getting to learn about yourself, it can be wildly accurate for a lot of people. So please bear in mind that they can be pretty practical. I can see someone here says tarot cards, yes, but twin flames, no. Twin flames are fine if you want to believe in them. It's just about understanding how they're affecting your journey. For instance, it's kind of like, say, let me just be explicit. If you're in stage 0, holding on to the twin flame thing, going onto the twin flame forums, being like, they're going to come back to me, they're my twin flame, we were meant to be together, without realizing, like, they're clearly not choosing you and they don't want to be with you, that is dangerous to your health and well-being. You're allowed your belief systems as long as they're not harming your health and well-being. That's my opinion on that as well too. Anyways, so if it's assisting you in terms of helping you understand why an experience might have happened, like for example, I actually had a client the other day who told me understanding twin flame stuff actually helped them, because when it was explained to them, they were like, this person was revealed to be someone from a past life, but it wasn't meant to be this experience that was meant to go on for the rest of their days. It was just a short, fleeting thing. That's fine. It really helped give them an alternate explanation for what occurred. And that's often what the power of, astrology charts can often do for a lot of people. It can give you a narrative that helps you make sense of an otherwise illogical situation. If it helps you heal, I'm all for it. And the reason I'm here for it is because often I find the narrative that's created is very consistent with the felt experience that a person goes through. So there is that. All right, let's keep going. Okay. Oh, this is such a good one. How to distract myself from his thoughts. I'm assuming you mean the thoughts of your ex in terms of some of the things they've said and done to you. Unfortunately, there's no escaping that. So some of the best things you can do, once again, bring up my little cute dream journal, write it down. it's really important to find ways to process these things. I'd speak to a therapist. I'd be like, okay, this thought haunts me. You know, I've had clients who've said, my ex said to me that they would never hurt me, but they've also said to me at the end, oh, I've been thinking about breaking up with you, but I couldn't stand the idea of losing you. But I also realized that what I'm feeling isn't love for you. You know, when you're experiencing those horrendous, traumatic things that were said, they're painful for a reason because they crush us. And it's really important to take the time to process what that feeling feels like and also get to the root of it too, ideally with a clinician, to be like, okay, where does that feeling stem from? Does this remind you of experiences you've had growing up, etc.? So there is a bit of that too. All right, next question. Okay, this is looking like a good one. My avoidant ex got into therapy the day after our breakup, after I asked him to go twice during our relationship. A month after the breakup, he was right back on the dating apps. I feel like he's healing for someone else. Why wouldn't he go to therapy for me? Okay, great question, and there's so many things I want to unpack with this. Firstly, do we know that he's still in therapy? 2, you know, do we know that he's healing for the next person? Don't get me wrong, I know the feelings that you have here are real, and it's a very common thing for a lot of people to feel like, well, my ex is just improving for someone else, right? My ex is just going off to, you know, be with someone else and they won't necessarily want to do this for me. Here's the thing you have to understand. In my profession, I don't see that. You know, a lot of people don't often, you know, like let's just say the avoidance discarded you, right? They blindsided you. They don't often continue the therapy. Problem's over. It was my partner. Didn't think it was my problem, right? And another thing to think about too, true healing for someone like that, oh, that's way off. You know, when I was talking about phase 0, 1, 2, that's where most of these avoidant attachers are in their own journey. But in terms of but a lot of them aren't even close to getting to phase 2. They're still stuck pining after you and acting like they're not by getting with the next person. So you got to understand that a lot of these individuals aren't actually doing proper change for the next person. Listen, you might have done some amazing things with them. You might have thought, you know what, I was probably the best partner they've ever had. They might have even told you you were the best partner for me. But will they necessarily stick and commit to those lessons that were learned in that relationship? More often than not, no. Real change and growth is slow, it's hard, it's painful, it's difficult, it takes years. And frankly, if your avoidant partner did one session of therapy and then the second one, so let's say this, got into therapy the day after our breakup, you know, we also don't know the clinician that they're seeing. They could literally see the therapist post-breakup and they'd be like, yeah, I think I made the right choice because I'm feeling so much better now. They might have cancelled the session because they realized, yep, I feel better now. Why? Because avoidants often feel relief when they break up with you because it helps them feel better and they escape the intense shutdown they're experiencing. So, if you think this person has become, I get why you think this. It's a very common fear. And I also understand that it's tied to this whole thing of like, why couldn't they do it for me when they might do it for someone else? What was in it about me that was unworthy that they wouldn't do this for me? I get it. Like, I truly understand that. And here's the thing. I know that a lot of this, frankly, stems back to an issue that was well and truly before your avoidant partner. It likely comes from the fact that you've had someone in your life, probably a caregiver, who did not change in order to, you know, be a good maybe caregiver for you or sibling, whatever it may have been. Usually a lot of the time that fear of why won't they do this thing for me, why won't they change, we often make it believe like we're responsible that they're not changing. If only I was smarter, better, prettier, they would go to therapy for me. They would change for me. Why aren't they doing this? It is such a 5-year-old, but very relatable, very cute feeling to have. And I want to hug that part of a lot of us that just feels that way because it is so real. How many of us have been growing up with parents who may have been chronic alcoholics, smokers, addicts, whatever, that got in the way of actually forming a proper relationship with us when we needed to have an emotionally attuned parent? and we internalize that behavior. We fought for them being like, can you please not do this? Can you please stop drinking? Can you please stop smoking? Whatever it may be. And they don't do it. We internalize that and think it's our fault that they're not doing that for us. So, going back to the present day, I understand why you feel this way, but they haven't changed. They're not going to. It's not about you. I know it feels like it's about you, but it's not. And that is a deep core thing that needs to be worked on in its own time, ideally in therapy. But you're very welcome to feel that feeling because it is so real, but it is not about you. All right, let's keep going. I'm going to do a few more and then I'm going to go to bed because I just realized I've gone for like 2 hours. I don't know how I have the stamina for these, but I mean, I really enjoy them. All right, let's read this. I'm going to have to be in no contact for 4 months when I'll have to see them at a social event. Oh, so I'm going to have been in no contact for 4 months when I see them next at a social event. What's the best way to handle this? Great question. The answer to this is probably plan ahead of time what the kind of reactions are that you're going to get from them. Usually it's very hyper or hypo. I find that you'll get one of two things. You'll get them either blanking you and not wanting to be anywhere near you and acting very cold and very shut down and like they don't really care. Or you'll get the complete opposite. You'll get them maybe even approaching you, coming up to you, saying things like, oh my God, you're here. And you'll feel like you guys are still dating even though they broke up with you. And it feels like, what the fuck? I thought you were convinced you wanted to get rid of me. They might also, particularly if they're a dismissive, leaning, fearful, avoidant, ask you a weird fucking question. Be like, hey, do you know where the toilet is when they're standing in front of the fucking bathroom? And it's sort of the equivalent of the, hey, how are you text or message that you get on social media from them. Why do they do this? Because they feel very afraid to actually open up a dialogue with you, and they're very, very scared to confront you. So, with that in mind, the question then becomes, how do you want to handle this particular situation? I will tell you from my own experience that anytime I've had a run-in with an ex that I wasn't ready to see, that put me into a state of extreme distress where I did feel like I was back in the freeze for a little bit. And so I would say best thing you could actually do besides actually thinking about how you'll approach them or not is actually how will you take care of yourself after the fact? Do you have someone you can speak to who won't judge you for when you speak, when you potentially run into them and you have a bad reaction from seeing them? Your nervous system, I'm going to warn you right now, will freak out because your nervous system registers them as a threat. So please, protect your heart, protect yourself. If you have to be at that social event and they're there, it's going to be painful. The best thing you can do is have a pre, during, post management plan, and know that one of the best things you can do is have someone to speak to that you can download off the back of this, because it is pretty brutal to go through. All right, let's keep going. Okay. I had a very close moment with my fearful, avoidant, leaning DA. Do you mean dismissive, leaning, fearful, avoidant? Doesn't matter. I think you mean the same thing. Anyways, after this, he went on an Instagram spree of adding women, lots of them. Is this because of the closeness? It's a common... Oh, sorry, one of my crystals fell away. It can be... I mean, it's a deactivating strategy, right? Like, it's the same thing when there's a lot of, hoarding that goes on. So, by hoarding, I mean, like, it's a common sex addict's method when they're feeling crappy about themselves to just add a bunch of, say, if they're a guy and they're straight, women to a social media account in order to get quick hits of validation and likes. So, absolutely. That's definitely a thing. Yep, feel free to add part 2. Is part 2 in the question mark box, or are you just going to write it here? Or is it, is it part of the question mark thing? Let me check it out. Oh, here we go, part 2. Part 2, let me pull it up. Has he now deactivated his Instagram? Is this because he realizes what he's doing and wants to stop it? It can, actually, that can be a thing. So, it's not just, we can't know for sure what he's doing, but sometimes I find with avoidants who do this, they can have a moment where, I get it, they'll be like, I swear off this, I'm not going to do this anymore, it's time to end this, I don't want to do this, and they'll like try and swear off the thing that they've been doing that's really bad for them. But they'll be back on it eventually too. A lot of avoidants, I find, do have a lot of coping mechanisms that are addictive in nature, and often they're very self-destructive, and they'll have these moments where they'll hit a shame spiral, be like, right, I'm not doing that again. But okay, I think I just lost my connection there for a second. The minute that life gets stressful again for a lot of them, that's when they're back on the substance of choice, because they haven't managed their own shame, their own codependency to stressful situations. So long story short, they haven't changed. It's just a temporary method of like them feeling a bit of like, I've got control over this now. They don't have control over that. So just to take a step back, we've got someone who's a fearful avoidant ex. So if they're fearful avoidant, we know likely has a lot of trauma, probably uses a lot of coping mechanisms to manage their own distress, who upon seeing an ex suddenly added a ton of women, then deactivated their Instagram. Suggests to me that there's probably a shame response in this, and they don't feel particularly good about themselves. So yes, I suspect that could be a narrative for what's happened. But at the same time, if we look at it without any assumption, bit of a strange fucking thing to do, don't you think? Like, I mean, if we don't try and intuit much of what's going on, why would you, after bumping into an ex, suddenly hoard a bunch of women and then go on to then deactivate your social media very quickly? It does not sound like someone who's of a very emotionally stable mind, is what I'm just going to say. So yeah, great two-part question. Next one. Okay, this is looking like a good one. All of these are great, by the way. Is it better to message them you're done if they dumped you to create closure and gain control back? Or just block if the avoidant, or just block if they were the one to discard me? It's a tricky question to answer because I think that it depends so much on the context. This whole thing of like, I want closure, I want control back for my situation can be approached in many different ways. And I think that we need to be careful where that motivation is coming from. So firstly, is it better to message them that you're done if they dumped you to create closure and gain control back? On the basis that you are not doing it to one-up them. Meaning, you should, I think in general, find a way to get your voice back up these situations. That can be very cathartic. But the question then becomes, why are you doing it? Where's this coming from? If you are doing it because you want to like stick it to them, I would suggest go a little deeper with that and figure out why you want to do it in that way. If you choose to do that, more power to you. But I often find that just keeps the drama going, and we're trying to de-escalate the drama. But if you're looking to do it to be like, I just need to let you know how this behavior made me feel. I'm not looking to re-engage, but I wish you all the best. I'd say that's a much more empowered and assertive way of going about it. Nothing wrong with that. So when we think of regaining control, when we think about, wanting to reclaim a sense of agency, really reflect on where this is coming from. Because in my experience, you're going to be stuck in stage 0 if it's for the drama's sake. But if it's for the design of like, I am choosing to end this on my own terms and ciao, go for it. In terms of blocking, I think that's again got to come down to individual discernment. I think that if you're doing it to do this whole like power game thing, and I know one of my followers can recognize this from a mile away because they recognize it in their own fearful avoidant tendencies. If you're a fearful avoidant, for instance, and you're playing the block the other game by blocking one person because you feel annoyed or ashamed by their behavior, and they're blocking you in return, and you're both trying to like activate one another, I don't think that's probably the healthiest way to go about that particular situation. So I'd say probably, again, do some reflection. But if you're doing it more from the place of, I actually want to block this person because they're harmful to my nervous system and I need to protect myself, and I don't trust them to actually respect me, perfectly reasonable thing to do. I think when it comes to no contact and the way people go about it, I think that a lot of people, honestly, can be a bit too extreme at times with no contact in these cases, but other times I think it's absolutely necessary. Again, individual discernment is advised. So That's just my opinion. I managed to do my experience without really going in traditional no contact. Some people don't as well too. So you don't have to do no contact all the time. I know there are some big fans of no contact out there who are like, it's the only way to do this. It's not. There's, it's not great. I can see someone here's added, fearful avoidants block you to protect themselves from their own longing for you. Yeah, and I imagine there's also a shame component too if the fearful avoidant was the one to blindside you, in that they're probably going to be the ones to block you when they feel bad about their actions because they don't like feeling like a bad person. I noticed someone, I think the same person who asked that question then said, the what ifs are really slowing me down. Yes, the good old what if monster. The what if monster comes from the wonderful emotion of shame. Many of us often have the, what if they did this for the next person? What if I behave differently? What if they're actually not avoidant? What if, in fact, they're secure? Well, if they were secure, you wouldn't be here. The what if monster is probably the most annoying, part to come out. The inner critic is bad, but I think the what if monster has its own special place in hell for the uninitiated, in that part has an annoying tendency to just start playing hypotheticals with you unnecessarily. It's really out there to try and, it's really one of those things where I just think, be very careful with, the what if monster and the games it plays with you, because it's really trying to give you a sense of it's trying to make it seem like you had some sort of agency over this and you could have controlled the situation when you can't. It's also trying to play around with this idea of, if you weren't so unworthy, then maybe, things would be different, but that's not going to change anything. So yeah, the what if monster, frankly, in not so kind terms, needs to learn to shut the fuck up. But don't ever say that to your what if monster. So anyways, let's keep going. I was the victim, sorry if that sounds dramatic, nope, not at all, of an avoidant blindside discard. To be fair to everyone here, I think we've all been a victim of an avoidant blindside. I also want to take a moment here. You can be victimized without being in victimhood. In this day and age, we have so many people who are fucking scared to call themselves a victim, and also, get worried that they're going to be, a victim by just experiencing a period of victimhood. Listen, on this planet, we've come here to experience all things in life, and victimhood is one of them for a season. Just experiencing a season of being a victim does not mean you have a victim mentality. So please understand that you're allowed to call yourself a victim off the back of this experience. That's what the term would be used for. Yes, there are some people who take it way too far and need therapy, but that's a different story. You are likely not one of them. Anyways, in fact, I'd actually argue, what's your resistance to calling yourself a victim? Now, that's an interesting story. I'd love to know that one. But anyways, I'm not here to psychoanalyze you. Let's keep going. I was the victim of an avoidant blindside discard. And my ex jumped into a rebound relationship with a few days of saying he was too anxious for a relationship and not ready. Of course. Almost 7 months later, they are still together. Can these rebounds actually last? Yes, but no. So, let me explain. When it comes to the rebound situation, I did an entire live on this ages ago. The health of the rebound is obviously going to be impacted by the health of the two people in it, right? So, can this situationship last? Well, it depends on a few factors. On one hand, it really depends on how emotionally unavailable the couple are, because if they are, it'll probably last a while, but there will be cheating and there will also be a lot of, disappointment at how boring it ultimately gets, because there's not a lot of, dopamine in the mix. So that's one aspect. Two is the fact that if the person they're now seeing is similar to yourself, then no, it'll end pretty abruptly and quickly as well too. 3, if they get into a rebound with someone who's highly antagonistic, like a narcissist, yeah, it can last quite a while. So you have to understand that the nature of the rebound is that it's a quick fix to a long-term problem. And I've seen a lot of these people, escalate. They're getting in a relationship within a month. They moved in together after 2 months. They're getting married. They're at the prenuptials. They're taking the photos and they're wearing matching robes, and oh my God, they look happier than we were when we were together. If you've been paying attention to a lot of the stuff that's said on this page, you would know that just because it looks really good is probably a sign that it's too good to be true. And also, rapidly doing all of these euphoric activities that are ticking the boxes, so to speak, doesn't mean the relationship, the rebound, is built on a foundation of true love and happiness. A lot of these rebounds are often, frankly, a psychological way for the avoidant to act. I don't have a problem. It was my ex. See, I made it work. We did this and it's totally hunky-dory. Oh, no. This is your way of avoiding shame that you have something inside of you that's not working properly. You know, many of us who might be anxiously attached feel like we've got a broken pickup. Well, they've got something broken in terms of their intimacy system. So no one's getting out of this for free. Like, none of us are immune to this. So yeah, just bear in mind that, you know, unfortunately, this is something that happens very often, and no, they're not destined to be happy, healthy relationships. Actually, to give you a really good example of one that happened just recently, there was a letter reading I did, number 73, I think it was. The guy was with a fearful, avoidant woman who abruptly dumped him to be with a guy who looked similar to him, who was a backpacker. Now, no shade to backpackers. They're lovely human beings. I've been a backpacker, good fun. But she dated a guy who was, 10 years younger than her, and he was from a different country, and she didn't speak the main language. They got married after 8 months. Then, about a year later, they broke up. So, I know it's very easy to use the seeming evidence of social media to judge these experiences and think, I'm going to, I'm not worthy. Like, this person clearly chose someone better than me. You got to understand that these people do very intense, erratic things post blindside. And these relationships that they have after you are very unstable, to say the least. So, yeah, that's just what I want to say. All right, a couple more. It's already past midnight, and I don't understand where I'm finding all this energy from, but I am. Maybe it's because I've changed my hours. I don't know. But you guys are asking such great questions as always. So anyways, let's keep doing this. This is a great question. I'm laughing at it because it's so common. I'm not laughing at what they've done to you. He says he's always liked me, but that I'm too good for him and that he's going to ruin my life. Is this a dismissive avoidant? It's very avoidant language. I can't determine whether they're dismissive or fearful. But I guess if we go to the basis, which is the dismissives are likely to say, I can't give you what you're looking for. And the fearfuls are more likely to say, what is it they say? You're too good for me and you can do so much better than me. I would say we're probably looking at the realm of dismissive leaning fearful avoidant, probably. Yeah, I'm going to say dismissive leaning fearful avoidant on this one, because the reason is that he's already got this idea that he's going to doom you, right? So he's got a pejorative idea that he's not good enough for you, right? He's saying you're too good for him. That's low self-esteem on steroids. Usually the dismissive avoidants have a very superficial self-esteem, but the fearfuls wear their low self-esteem like a badge of honor, and they're very self-deprecating much of the time. So yeah, I would say there's that. I could see someone here said, I'm sending you a virtual calming hot chocolate before you go to bed. I love that. That's very cute. So I see someone here has added to the question I'm answering. I've been there too. Take it as a compliment because you probably are too good for him. Yes, I completely agree. Look, in its own weird way, that's true. I know it may not feel that way when you hear this. A lot of the time when we hear this, we think that I want you. I feel like I am good enough for you. And I also don't feel that I need to, I don't feel like you need to have this belief about yourself as well too. So, don't worry guys, you're not keeping me awake. Like, I'm actually enjoying this. I'm not feeling too tired just yet. I don't know. Maybe there's something positive about this experience for me. I'm getting energy from it. But I'd say, with this, I'd say it's a couple of things. It is a compliment, but I can understand it feeling deeply painful because it's so hurtful. It's like, why would you say that as you're breaking up with me? Like, why would you say that? Like, it just doesn't make any fucking sense. However, this is classic avoidant attachment land, the severe end, where it's like they genuinely don't think that they're good enough for you. I actually went to, so I was doing some continued professional development today, and I was doing a class on BPD, borderline personality disorder, in adolescence. Now, this is a very fucking contentious diagnosis. Reason being that borderline personality disorder, which is known for its stigmatizing description in the DSM-5, is a diagnosis which is often, unfortunately, has a lot of misdiagnoses, particularly with the neurodivergent crowd. Too many people who are autistic are misdiagnosed as having BPD, which is just not fair. And also, on medical records, if you get this, there's a lot of unfortunate resistance from clinicians to work with you because, unfortunately, a lot of people who are extremely traumatized, dysregulated, and have personality disorders have become the bane of the mental health world. So there's that aspect. Now, what I wanted to bring into this conversation with attachment injuries is this lecture that I was in today was talking about the way this shows up in childhood. And they were saying, which is consistent with my knowledge, that fearful avoidance, those that are disorganized, have a far higher likelihood of having borderline personality disorder. Now, I'm only bringing it up because it was interesting because as the conversation was developing, they were also talking about how it can show up with people with insecure attachment. And for the longest time ever, I thought dismissives couldn't have BPD. But BPD, like a lot of these things, exists on a continuum. So, occasionally in the lives, I'll say there might be a bit of personality flavor with this as well too. So the reason I'm sharing this in relation to a question like this, when someone says, you're too good for me, I'd ruin our relationship, I kind of get a little bit of BPD vibes. BPD is also characterized by extreme feelings of unworthiness, amongst other things. And because of the emotional volatility that's there, combined with the arrested development because of all the trauma, combined with a lot of the presentations that can happen. I mean, when we think of BPD, it can show up in so many ways. It's either hyper-externalizing, bit of internalizing and externalizing, or hyper-internalizing, meaning like the inner critic just, got on steroids and is now even more painful than it is for the average person. So when we think of how borderline personality disorder might translate to these attachment issues as well too, I wouldn't be surprised if it also does at times overlap with the severe end of anxious and avoidant attachment. And on top of that too, the presentation I was seeing today was also saying that a lot of people with BPD, particularly on the moderate to severe end, do demonstrate narcissistic tendencies and traits. So, what does this all mean for you lot? Really nothing much, but it's just to say that, when it comes to the pathologizing of a lot of individuals, I know some people find benefit in labels. I know some people find it beneficial to be like, oh, well, there's probably a bit of this extra stuff going on there too, and there might well be. I'm just sharing this to say that, it's food for thought. There is a bit of this. As I can see someone says, Bezel van der Kolk, who is the author of The Body Keeps the Score, articulates that it's usually fearful avoidance, then CPTSD, and then there's also the potential for BPD as well too, to which I'd say I'd agree. All the insecure attachments are created by complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, but the fearful avoidance have historically had it the worst because of all the shit fuckery that's been in their life. So, yeah, there's that. I know there's also some contention from clinicians. Even Dr. Ramani, I think, is quoted in some of her private stuff that she said BPD is essentially CPTSD on steroids. I don't agree with that assessment. I don't think that we can just say, well, it's just CPTSD on, that's gone crazy. I think there's more to it than that because there's also evidence to suggest there's a genetic component to this as well too. So I'm like, I think that's a dangerous thing to say. So yeah. Anyways, all in all, my final sentence to this question is to say, When I hear a lot of excessive unworthiness come up, we have to consider that the person has a very unstable sense of self, which again is also something that we hear in BPD cases. But what does it mean for you? Nothing. Really very little. It just, at the core of it, he feels unworthy. He doesn't feel he can hold on to you. It's like being given $1 million and you spend it all on whatever you find because you don't believe that you're worthy of investing properly and holding on to that money. True story for a lot of people. All right. Next questions. All right. I'm going through the third discard in the last year. Same dismissive avoidant. Says she lost feelings. 9 weeks later, I can't stop waiting for her to call. What is wrong with me? Oh, nothing. Honestly, nothing at all. I know you're probably feeling like there's something wrong with you because you've never behaved like this before, but I hate to break it to you, but this is a very normal experience for a lot of people to go through. How is it that I'm nearly 3 hours in and I've got like more followers than ever now watching this thing? Jesus. This is great. Just remarking, this has been a good live. Thanks for all for watching. Okay, going back to the question. So you mentioned you've gone through a third discard with the same person, right? She says the usual thing, I've lost feelings because she's in the freeze. 9 weeks later, I can't stop waiting for her to call. Yeah, of course you can't, because you're still holding out on hope that she'll return to you. You're still holding out onto hope that she'll apologize and that she'll recognize her mistake and want to be back with you. You've had this happen to you 3 times now, right? She's boomeranged. You're now in an addictive cycle because you're probably going through a bit of withdrawal. What you're experiencing is so normal and so okay. And I just want to make it very clear that when it comes to these addictive experiences that we go through post-discard, it is very normal to still be pining them. I only got discarded once by my infamous ex, and I was still pining for them to get back to me after 6 months. So the point simply is to say is that it may not feel normal to feel this way, but it is a normal experience that many people have gone through. Hell, if any of you have gone through this experience, feel free to just show an emoji to demonstrate that you too have also experienced this. Or better yet, comment if this is something that you resonate with as well too. I can see someone here has asked, so DAs boomerang too, not just FAs? Yeah, they can. It depends. I'd say their proclivity for boomeranging is much lower than the fearfuls. So there is that. Yeah, see, plenty of people here who are showing their emojis, definitely, and who are writing, have gone through this as well too. I'm currently working with a group of people as part of a group coaching program. A lot of them have said to me, I know that logically this person's not good for me, but my heart still wants them. If I got the opportunity to be back with them, I wouldn't hesitate. It is so okay to feel that way. Listen, a lot of you still have a lot of love for your ex, for your avoidant ex. Just own it. Have a period of time where you just own the fact that you really love this person and you still want to be with them. That's totally fine. Many of you are still grieving the great stuff about this. Remember at the beginning of this live, I was talking about narrative. Creating a cohesive narrative for this experience. Part of that narrative is also recognizing I still miss the great parts of this person. Your dismissive avoidant in this case probably had amazing parts of them as well too. Too often, we try and demonize and villainize these people because, I get it, we're hurting and we want to see them for who they are. But seeing them for who they are also means recognizing the good that you also got in these experiences as well too. So just because you've gone through an extremely difficult experience does not mean that this person isn't worthy of you pining for them. Now, I know later you asked, how do I stop this? I'm going to bring up this cute thing again. Start journaling about it. Write letters to them that you don't send to them. Really talk it out. Talk to a therapist. Talk to people who validate your experience without shaming you. Avoid the crowd who are like, you dodged a bullet. They're not your soulmate. They're just not that into you. If they wanted to, they would. Get rid of those people. I'm being dead serious. I know I'm not meant to give advice, but there's the only piece of advice you'll get from me in this live. Do not have people who invalidate your experience on this. You really need to honor what you've been through. I can see someone here says, how do I see this live later? It'll be saved, don't worry. They're all saved. So yeah, the point simply is, if you have a part of yourself that misses them and you're feeling a lot of emotion behind it, honor it. Hell, I know plenty of people who've had, fantasies of getting back with their ex. Write it out. Do some hardcore erotica. This is the time and place for you to, really feel your fantasies and just enjoy them. Why? Because I'll go back to what I said. What we suppress, we repress, and we become depressed. Not formal, psychology talk, but I don't care. So the point simply is to say, honor that. So take your time with it. I know it's uncomfortable, but it is what it is. All right, next person. One of my favorite people. Considering the dating market, are we to start embracing this, the solitude that's in life? Because it seems like there aren't many healthy people. Okay, this is such a phenomenal question, and it really sort of raises, some understandable existential thoughts. Here's what I think from multiple angles. So, I have this belief that from a logical perspective, we have a lot of people out there who still need to do a lot of healing on themselves, right? Now, in saying that, do we need to find the perfectly healed person to connect with our lives and make it work? No, that's perfectionism at play. Be mindful of that. Really, at the end of the day, I think there are some unseen forces that are at work at times in terms of navigating this. Much of the time, I think we're told, particularly by dating idiots, gurus, who want to try and help us find a relationship as quickly as possible. That's great in the beginning, right? Get out there, date, get some experience, wonderful. But I actually think the better thing for a lot of us is to work on ourselves, and eventually, like I was saying with addiction recovery, you're probably going to exit the dating pool of people who you used to normally date with. You might also find that the kind of people that you would normally pick, particularly on dating apps, drastically changes. No longer are you interested in the men and women who are of a particular height, who have particular features that you find attractive. It's now more about, how do they treat me? How do I feel with them? Do I feel safe, seen and heard, etc.? And deeper than that too, you might get to a point where you're like, I actually don't want to date. I actually kind of want to be alone and develop my life for a little while too. And here's where the magic starts to happen. I find if people start living their life, really living their purpose and just, enjoying their life, one thing leads to another. They might open their dating app while they're on a trip to Italy one day and they, are interacting with someone, and it's someone they never would have normally dated. They're, a bit different, and things end up just magically turning into an experience which is unlike anything they've experienced before. Sometimes people, realize they've got a friend who they never would have expected they would have dated in a million years, who they look at differently now after all this healing and go, we would actually be really good. And then they end up getting together and they're like, why the fuck didn't we do this earlier? This is great. And not all situations obviously end this well, but the point simply is to say is that I think at times we are dating from the perception of someone who has attachment wounding. 2, I think also at times we think we can control a lot of this stuff when we really can't. And 3, frankly, even though I know a lot of us are wired for emotional connection, we all want connection, I get that. I reckon if you are doing what you love, you follow your purpose and your passion in life, you are likely to meet a crowd of people who are very similar to yourself on a very similar journey. I know that a lot of people who have been doing a lot of work on themselves, they meet similar people at events. They meet people who are, at very similar stages. I went on a holiday recently where a person that I met, who, for complete compatibility reasons, we wouldn't have been able to make it work anyways because they're not someone I'm sexually into. But I remember I went on a holiday recently where someone who was from the States was traveling, and they were navigating an experience where they had literally been doing a lot of inner work and healing, funnily enough, from a fearful avoidant breakup. And as we were talking, I remember thinking to myself, isn't this wild? I wouldn't have struck up a conversation with this person. They were just keen to talk with me at a cafe in this remote part of New South Wales here in Australia. And yet we both really hit it off and connected. And it just made me think, wow, when you're, that phrase, like attracts like, well, I really believe it. I think that when you are working on yourself, you just give off a different kind of energy that people pick up on. I know it sounds weird, but the thing is that it really is true is that when we become a lot healthier internally, we just spot the dysfunction from a mile away and we do start to find healthier people out there. It is unfortunately a bit of a lonely, depressing, boring, and at times miserable experience to get to that stage because you got to clear out a bunch of people. But eventually the despair lifts and you realize actually life isn't too bad on your own. And then eventually you start to, get out and meet new people who enliven you to new experiences. So that is my answer there. But I do think we have to realize that a lot of people are just not ready to be in relationships. These severely avoidantly attached people actually should not be in dating, in my opinion. Can we stop them from dating? Nah. And are they kind of helping us elevate to the next stage of our life, putting us through trauma? Well, I guess that's a twisted way of looking at it, but I guess so. But long story short, I think that at the end of the day, I think you've just got to focus on you. I know it seems, again, oxymoronic considering the fact that in dating it seems like focusing on the other, but really, you got to put yourself first. So yeah, great question, very philosophical, bit existential. That's my 2 cents on it all. All right, next question. And I'm starting to feel the fatigue, so I think this will be my last one and I'm going to go to bed. All right, how many more questions have I got here? Oh my goodness, I've answered so many. This is hilarious. How do you process their post-discard behaviors? Like going crazy with distractions and suddenly getting married to a narcissist. Does that mean they erased us? What is really going on? Hence, how to accept that they will never come back and apologize? Oh, great question. I guess to give a really simple answer with that, I think it is really about coming to radical acceptance of the situation. I think that when it comes to accepting the fact that they're behaving in ways which just seem so frivolous, the fact that they're likely never going to come back, I think you have to go through the resistance to that. So much of the time, we don't want to hear that because even if our logical brain goes, they're not good for us, something internally is like, I'm not ready to hear that shit. And I think this beautiful organ right here is the part that's like, we're not ready to hear that. I just want to know that they're coming back to me. Why? Because a lot of us are still waiting for a particular person who made us feel that way to rectify those feelings. So, that emotional abandonment, unfortunately, needs to be worked on. So how do we do this? I think a lot of us need to get to a stage of really sitting with ourselves, grieving the loss of these relationships, and allowing ourselves to just sit with the grief of these experiences as if these people died. And even though I know they're physically still out there, it's really about just allowing ourselves to mourn what we had and just take our time with it. So there is that. I also think too, it's part of the cognitive dissonance. We often post-discard, right? We see some sides of our avoidant that are wild. Like sometimes they're partyholics, they're alcoholics, they're, doing really irresponsible behaviors. And that's so different to the amazing version that showed up with us when we were getting to know them. It's about learning to marry those two bits of dissonant information. They can be amazing and at the same time reckless and seemingly indifferent with how they treat themselves and other people as well too. And I think it does have to be one of those things where you have to find ways to integrate that and realize the person you were dating has multiple sides to them, just like we all do. A side that can be very loving and give great acts of service, whilst also simultaneously being a bit of a mess and also reckless. And do you want that kind of person as a romantic partner? You can still love them at a distance, but is that the kind of healthy partner that you're looking for? That's a question up for everyone to decide. And what a great place to end this on. Okay, everyone, thank you very much for being with me for what feels like 3 hours, I think it was, of talking about the healing from the avoidant discard. I am going to start, making content on these different stages at some point, and maybe I'll make like cheap webinars that people can join where I can give you guys the opportunity to ask your questions in real time to me instead of in this like chat box here where it's a bit limiting. Get on the PowerPoint slide of things as well too. Maybe have some some connection over Zoom. So if you're interested in that, I could do that. I'm thinking of maybe doing that in about April as well, because at the moment, I've got this group coaching thing that I've just started, which I'm really enjoying, and I want to open more class spots up as well too. So if you guys are interested in either webinars, classes, I'm open to doing that. I was thinking about doing a course again, but I've realized that my own professional entrepreneurial opinion is, I think people, if I have to be explicit, I think a lot of people are actually looking for connection with the people that that they follow. And I think too often a lot of us entrepreneurs are trying to find ways to get passive income by creating these virtual products that you can consume without involving us. So that way, obviously, from a financial perspective, you don't have to trade time for money. But I think if I've learned anything from my time of doing this for a while, that I think a lot of people actually prefer having that connection with the creator that they follow. So just sharing some of my rambling thoughts with you guys to say, I feel like that's good. Someone's asked, is there a max number of participants in the webinars? Well, I haven't done one yet, so the answer is nah. I'll probably just do it quite cheaply at the start. I'll be like, hey, it's just $5 US. Do you want to join? You can just join up, and then you can ask your questions. So yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today. It was a lot of fun. I always love doing lives, and I'm looking forward to maybe evolving this, like I said, into webinars in the future. Until then, I hope everyone has a wonderful day where they are, and I will see you guys later.